Within the Amber Revelation, the secrets of our ancestors are preserved in a golden light, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Join us as we unlock the past to save the future of our digital civilization today. Hit subscribe now and discover the wisdom hidden in the glow. First thing I heard was my phone buzzing on the nightstand. It was 2047 in the morning. I know the exact time because I had just looked at the clock 20 minutes before. One of those nights where sleep keeps sliding out of reach. I picked up the phone and saw my wife's name on the screen. She was supposed to be at her sister's place in Marietta with our daughter. I answered before the second buzz finished. She didn't say hello. She just said, "They arrested Zoe." I sat up straight. What? The police. They came to the gas station on Clement. She was filming something on her phone. They said she was interfering. They took her, Marcus. They took our 16-year-old daughter and I don't know where she is. Her voice wasn't crying. It was worse than crying. It was the voice of someone who has already gone past the point of crying and landed somewhere very cold and very quiet. Which precinct? I said. I don't know. They wouldn't tell me. I called the station on 5th and they said she wasn't in their system yet. What does that even mean? Not in the system yet? It means they're stalling. It means they're figuring out their story before they file the paperwork. I knew what that meant and I didn't say it out loud. Stay where you are, I told her. Don't go to any station. Don't talk to anyone in uniform until I get there. I was already out of bed and pulling on jeans. I want to be honest about something. A lot of people know me as the guy who runs Hartwell Logistics. We move freight across 14 states, 300 and some employees. Decent reputation. What most people don't know is what I did before that. 12 years in Army Special Operations. 2 tours in Afghanistan. 1 in Iraq. 1 in a country I still can't name in public. I left with a chest full of commendations and a very specific set of skills that I had spent the last 9 years trying to forget. I thought I had gotten good at being a civilian. Sunday afternoon barbecues. School board meetings. Worrying about whether the quarterly numbers were going to satisfy investors. Turns out forgetting doesn't go as deep as you think. I drove to Marietta in just under 40 minutes. My wife met me in the parking lot of a Waffle House on the corner, because that was the last place she had talked to Zoe. She was wearing the same dress she'd had on for dinner, and her hands were shaking when she reached for me. She showed me the video. Zoe had been filming. That much was true, but she hadn't been filming the police. She had been filming a man in a gray suit getting into a black Chevy Tahoe outside the gas station. The man looked nervous. He was looking over his shoulder, and right before Zoe's phone got knocked out of her hands, you could see, just barely, the face of the man helping him into the vehicle. I recognized that face. A lot of people in Cobb County would. That was Deputy Chief Harlan Price, the man who ran the department's narcotics division and who had been photographed shaking hands with the governor at 3 different fundraisers. I watched the video twice. Then I put my wife's phone in my pocket. I need you to go back inside and order coffee, I said. Don't call anyone. Don't post anything. Marcus, I'm going to find her. I drove to the 5th precinct myself. The building was the kind of ugly that only government architecture achieves. All concrete angles and fluorescent light bleeding through frosted windows. I walked in and asked the desk officer, a young woman with tired eyes, where I could find my daughter, Zoe Hartwell, 16 years old, brought in sometime in the last 2 hours. She typed something, looked at the screen, typed something else. I'm not showing anyone by that name. Try the juvenile intake log. She looked at me. Sir? I know she's here, I said. My voice was steady. I made sure of that. I'm going to stand right here until someone with more authority than you tells me where my daughter is. She picked up a phone and murmured something into it. 2 minutes later, a man came out from the back. He was maybe 45, heavy-set, with a silver bar on his collar and the kind of face that has spent years learning to look neutral. His nameplate said SGT. Bellamy. Mr. Hartwell, he said. Not a question. He already knew who I was. Where is my daughter? Your daughter was brought in for obstruction and interference with an ongoing investigation, he said. She's being processed. She's 16. Yes, sir. Which is why we contacted juvenile services. She had a phone, I said. What happened to the phone? Something shifted in his expression. Almost nothing, just a tightening at the corners of his eyes. But I saw it. Personal property is logged during intake, he said. You can file a claim for belongings after. I'd like to see her. Now. He gave me the kind of look that men in positions of minor power give when they're deciding whether to play the card in their hand. Then he smiled, the smile that doesn't reach anything above the cheekbones. She's being processed, sir. Probably another hour. You can wait. I waited. I sat in those hard plastic chairs for 45 minutes, and I did not waste a single one of them. I pulled out my own phone and I opened an app that looks exactly like a weather radar. It is not a weather radar. I typed in a 12-digit code and connected to a secure server that I had maintained since leaving the service. The kind of thing you keep because someone, somewhere, once told you that you'd never know when you'd need it again. I sent 3 messages. The first was to a man named Aldous, who works in data infrastructure in a way that I'll describe only as thorough. I asked him to pull everything on Harlan Price, not the public record. The real record. The second was to a woman named Chen, who runs a private legal firm in Atlanta. I told her I needed a juvenile defense attorney at the 5th Precinct before sunrise. The third was to a contact at the FBI field office in Atlanta, a man I'd worked alongside in a situation that he and I have both agreed to never put in writing. I told him I had footage of a deputy chief facilitating something I hadn't identified yet, and that I suspected an arrest was made specifically to seize the recording device. Then I put my phone away and I watched Sergeant Bellamy stand at the far end of the lobby, talking quietly on his own phone, glancing at me every 30 seconds. He didn't know what I used to be. To him, I was a freight company CEO in a jacket. That was fine. I'd been underestimated before. It usually works in my favor. Zoe came out at 4:15 in the morning. She looked smaller than I remembered, which is a specific kind of grief that I don't have a word for. Her hair was pulled back and she had a red mark on her left wrist, the kind you get from a zip tie or from someone grabbing too hard. She saw me and something in her face broke open and then immediately closed back up, the way kids do when they're trying not to cry in front of strangers. I walked to her and put my hand on her shoulder. You okay? They took my phone, she said. Her voice was very quiet. I know. It had the video on it. I know that too. I looked at Bellamy, who was standing 10 feet away with his arms crossed. I looked at him for a long moment without saying anything. Then I looked back at Zoe. Let's go find your mom. In the car, Zoe told me what happened. She had been with her friend outside the gas station, just killing time after dinner, when the gray-suited man had pulled up and seemed panicked, muttering into his phone. Instinct made her film it. She wasn't even sure why. It just looked wrong. Then a second car pulled up, and 2 uniformed officers jumped out, and one of them knocked the phone out of her hand, and the other one grabbed her arm, and that was the end of it. Did they say anything to you? I asked. In the car, or when you got to the station? Zoe hesitated. One of them, she said. In the car. He said filming police is a crime in Georgia. It isn't. I know. I told him that. What did he say? She looked out the window. He said it would be, for me, if I didn't keep my mouth shut. That landed somewhere in my chest and stayed there, burning. I dropped Zoe with her mother and told them both to go to a hotel. Not the sister's house, a hotel, under my wife's maiden name. I gave my wife $300 in cash and told her to leave her regular phone in the car. She looked at me the way she sometimes does, like she's remembering who I used to be and trying to decide how she feels about seeing him again. How bad is this? She asked quietly. I don't know yet, I said, but someone powerful enough to have 2 uniformed officers make an evidence grab in under 30 minutes doesn't stumble into that kind of power. I drove back to Atlanta. It was almost 5 in the morning by the time I got home and sat down at the desk in my study. The house was empty and very quiet. I made coffee and I opened my laptop and I started working. By 7, Aldous had sent me the first file on Price. Harlan Price, 53 years old, 26 years on the force. Deputy Chief of Narcotics. The clean version, decorated career, strong clearance rates, pillar of the community. The real version was considerably more interesting. 3 separate internal affairs complaints, all filed, all closed with no finding. 2 of the complainants had moved out of state within a year of filing. The third had recanted, citing personal reasons. There were real estate transactions that didn't match a deputy chief's salary. A beach house in St. Simon's Island, purchased in 2019 for $840,000. Cash. But the most interesting piece was something Aldous flagged almost as an afterthought. A name that appeared in Price's financial records, routed through a shell LLC registered in Delaware. The LLC was called Brentwood Consolidated Holdings. The beneficial owner of Brentwood Consolidated Holdings was my brother-in-law, Ray. I sat very still for a while. Ray is my wife's older brother. He's been in real estate development for 15 years. The kind of development that happens in neighborhoods just before they gentrify. The kind that requires permits approved very quickly and inspections that pass very easily. I had never liked him, and he had never liked me. And we had managed to coexist at family dinners by staying at opposite ends of the table. I had always written him off as a man with slippery ethics and a good tailor. I had underestimated him the same way Bellamy had underestimated him, the same way Bellamy had underestimated me. Ray had been paying Price, not a small amount, $42,000 over 18 months, in increments small enough to avoid automatic flags routed through Brentwood. In exchange, Price had used his position to quietly kill 2 investigations into Ray's properties, one for building code violations that should have shut down a project in West Midtown, one for a potential money laundering inquiry that had been opened by a detective named Ochoa and closed 6 days later with a note that read, "Insufficient basis." And the man in the gray suit at the gas station, the man Zoe had filmed getting into Price's car, he was a federal informant. His name wasn't something I could find, but his face matched a sealed case that my FBI contact confirmed without confirming, if you understand what I mean by that. Price had been helping someone move a federal witness, which meant Price's corruption had moved well past taking real estate money from my brother-in-law. He was obstructing federal proceedings. Zoe hadn't just filmed the nervous man at a gas station. She had filmed evidence of a federal crime, and 2 officers of the Cobb County Police Department had put my 16-year-old daughter in zip ties to get that phone. I sat in my study until the morning light came through the windows. Then I made 2 calls. The first was to Chen, my attorney. I told her what I had. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Marcus, if this is what you're telling me, this isn't a police misconduct case. This is a RICO case. I know. You need to be careful about how you use this. If you burn Price directly, you might spook whoever he's protecting, and you'll lose the federal angle. I don't want to burn Price," I said. "I want to starve him, and then I want him to burn himself." The second call was to Ray. He picked up on the third ring, his voice carrying that easy, confident warmth of someone who believes they are always the smartest person in any room. "Hey, Marcus. Haven't heard from you in a while. I know about Brentwood," I said. Silence. "I know about the payments to Price," I continued. "I know about the West Midtown inspection. I know about Detective Ochoa's investigation and how it disappeared." More silence. When Ray spoke again, the warmth was completely gone. "You don't know what you're talking about. My daughter has a red mark on her wrist from where one of Price's guys grabbed her," I said. "She's 16 years old, Ray. Your niece. Your sister's kid." "I didn't know anything about—" "Don't," I said. "Do not say that to me." I heard him breathe. "What do you want?" he finally asked. "I haven't decided yet," I said. "But I want you to understand something. I spent 12 years doing things that the government still won't put on paper. I know how to be patient, and I know how to be thorough, so I'd recommend you sit very still and wait to hear from me." I hung up. Over the next 5 days I worked. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't make noise. I moved the way I had been trained to move. Quietly, systematically, without ego. Aldous pulled Price's full phone records through channels I will not describe. We mapped his network. the officers who had arrested Zoe, Sergeant Bellamy who had stalled me in the lobby, 2 detectives in the narcotics division who had been running interference for years. It was a compact structure, maybe 11 people total. Small enough to be loyal, large enough to be dangerous. Then we started hitting the money. Chen's firm filed a formal complaint with the Georgia Peace Officer Standards and Training Council, attaching documentation of Price's unexplained income. Simultaneously, Aldis flagged Brentwood Consolidated's account structure to the IRS through an anonymous tip line. Within 72 hours, Ray's primary business account was under a hold, pending audit inquiry. I watched Ray's reaction through his phone calls. Yes, I know how that sounds. He called Price twice in one afternoon. The conversations were brief, increasingly panicked. Price told him to calm down. Price said it was nothing. Price said it was nothing. Price said he had people who handled this kind of thing. What Price didn't know was that his people were already underwater. The officer who had grabbed Zoe's arm, a man named Coyle, had 6 prior conduct complaints, all buried. Chen sent those complaints to the department's insurance carrier with a cover letter explaining that we were prepared to litigate. The insurance carrier sent the department a letter within 48 hours threatening to review the department's liability coverage. Bellamy, it turned out, had a personal loan from a private lender that was itself a subsidiary of one of Ray's holding companies. That's not legal. That's called a prohibited financial relationship between a public officer and a private party. The moment Chen's team filed that with the county ethics board, Bellamy stopped showing up for his shifts. Coyle drove a truck that cost more than his annual salary. We filed a civil asset inquiry. The first crack came on a Thursday morning. My FBI contact called me directly, which he had never done before. The informant situation, he said without preamble. Yes, we're opening a formal investigation. We need the original footage. It was taken from my daughter during an illegal arrest. We know. We can get a warrant for it. The phone is gone, I said. But the footage isn't. I had the video. My wife had sent it to me before everything happened, just sharing it the way you share something strange you saw that day. Neither of us had known what it was at the time. I'll get it to you. Marcus, he said. If Price finds out the feds are looking, he won't find out from me, I said. But I need something in return. I can't make promises. I'm not asking for promises. I'm asking you to look at the arrest record for a 16-year-old named Zoe Hartwell and make sure it disappears the way Ochoa's investigation disappeared. Except this time, the right direction. A pause. I'll see what I can do, he said. 4 days later, Zoe's record was expunged. The charges were listed as filed in error. Chen sent me a copy at 7 a.m. with a single-line message, clean. But that wasn't enough. The men who had done this were still working. Coyle was still on duty. Price was still walking into his office every morning, still shaking hands, still being photographed at fundraisers. And Ray was still out there, running his developments, eating at nice restaurants, living the life he had paid a deputy chief to protect. I needed to see it, not hear it through a phone. See it. I drove to the precinct on a Wednesday afternoon and parked across the street. I watched the shift change, watched Coyle walk out in civilian clothes looking loose and unhurried. A man without a care. He was big, maybe 6'2", broad in the way that comes from a gym membership and a bad temper. He walked to his truck and climbed in. His truck wouldn't start. He tried 3 times, getting out to look under the hood, the way people do even when they have no idea what they're looking at. Then a tow truck pulled up. County impound, sir. Civil inquiry hold. I watched him argue with the driver for 4 minutes. Then I watched him stand in the parking lot and look around with the specific expression of a man who has never had to deal with consequences and is only now encountering the concept. He looked across the street and saw me. I don't know if he recognized me. I imagine he did. I rolled down the window and looked at him for a moment, and then rolled it back up and drove away. That night my phone buzzed at 11:40 p.m. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered anyway. You think this is funny? The voice was Coyle. Tight, ugly, and a little drunk. You think freezing some accounts makes you safe? You have no idea who Price is connected to. You have no idea what he can do." "I have a pretty good idea," I said. "Your daughter got off easy," he said. "The next time we find her somewhere inconvenient, she won't." I looked at the ceiling of my dark bedroom. A calm came over me that I recognized from certain moments in certain operations. The moment when a decision finalizes itself. "I'm going to give you some advice," I said. "Don't call this number again. In fact, don't use your phone at all for the next 48 hours. Because someone is listening." He hung up. I sent the recording of the call to Chen, to my FBI contact, and to Aldous with instructions to cross-reference Coyle's call records for the past 6 months. What came back in 18 hours was worse than I'd anticipated. Coyle had been in regular contact with someone in the county prosecutor's office. Not Price. Someone adjacent to Price. A woman named, actually, I'm not going to use her name here because her prosecution is still pending, but she had been involved in managing which cases got fast-tracked and which ones quietly stalled, and her contact with Coyle went back 2 years. The corruption was bigger than a deputy chief with a beach house. It was structural. It was load-bearing. I spent a night sitting with that, not strategizing, just sitting. My wife called around 10. She and Zoe were still at the hotel, which I had extended through the end of the week. "Zoe asked about you today," she said. "Is she okay? She's scared. But she's also—" A pause. "She's angry in a way that I think is going to be useful to her later." Does that make sense? It makes complete sense. She wants to know if the video mattered. I thought about the federal warrant, about the investigation that was now open, about the informant who was, according to my FBI contact, now in proper protective custody. "It mattered," I said, "more than she knows. When is this done?" "Soon," I said, and for the first time in 2 weeks I actually believed it. The end came quickly once it started moving. The federal warrant hit Price on a Friday morning. 2 agents in the lobby of the precinct, a third waiting in the parking garage. Price was walked out in handcuffs at 9:47 a.m. I know the time because I was parked a block away and Chen texted it to me. I didn't feel what I expected to feel. I had thought it would be satisfying in a hot, clean way. It wasn't. It was quieter than that. More like setting down something heavy that you've been carrying long enough to forget it wasn't part of you. Bellamy resigned that afternoon. Coyle was suspended pending criminal referral. Ray called me 3 hours after Price's arrest. He didn't say hello. He just said, "I need a lawyer." "You have lawyers, Ray." "Not for this." "No," I agreed. "Not for this." "Marcus." His voice broke in a way I had never heard from him before. The confidence was completely gone. What was underneath it was smaller and sadder than I had expected. I didn't know they were going to grab Zoe. I swear to you I didn't know that. I thought about Zoe's wrist. I thought about her sitting in that precinct at 4 in the morning, trying not to cry. "Your arrangement with Price is what made it possible," I said. "You built the system. You don't get to be surprised by what the system does." "I have a family too," he said. "I know," I said. "Talk to a lawyer." I hung up. The proceedings that followed were complicated in the way that legal proceedings involving public officials always are. Price's attorney tried 4 different approaches before settling on a cooperation agreement. He gave up his network in exchange for reduced charges, and the network turned out to be extensive enough that the U.S. attorney held a press conference about it, the kind with 3 rows of chairs for reporters and a table of evidence bags. Ray pled guilty to bribery and obstruction. He received 2 years and a fine that his attorneys negotiated down from what it should have been, which I found enraging. But Chen reminded me that the alternative was a trial that would drag Zoe's name into everything, and so I let it go. Bellamy cooperated with the county ethics investigation. Coyle did not, and is awaiting trial. The woman from the prosecutor's office I mentioned. Her case is ongoing, and I genuinely cannot comment. 6 months after the arrest at the gas station, I sat in the living room with Zoe on a Saturday morning. She had her laptop open, supposedly doing homework, but I could tell she was watching something. She had the earbuds in that she uses when she's trying to look busy. "Can I ask you something?" she said without looking up. Sure. Did you always know Ray was like that? I thought about that honestly. I knew he wasn't someone I trusted, I said. I didn't know the specifics. Does Mom know? She's working through it, I said, which was as accurate as I could make it. My wife and Ray had not spoken since the guilty plea. I didn't think they would speak for a while. Family grief is its own particular slow disaster, different from every other kind. Zoe pulled one earbud out. The foundation thing, she said. Is that actually going to do anything? She meant the Hartwell Justice Fund. I had set it up 3 weeks earlier, partnering with a civil rights law firm in Atlanta to provide free legal representation to people who had been subjected to misconduct by law enforcement officers in the state. The first case we took was a young man in DeKalb County who had been arrested on fabricated evidence by 2 officers who had been working under a supervisor later connected to Price Network. We cleared him in 11 days. I don't know yet, I said honestly. It's going to take time. She put the earbud back in. Then she took it out again. Dad, yeah? I would have taken the video again, she said. Even knowing. I looked at my daughter, 16 years old and already made of something harder than I had been at twice her age. I know, I said. I just wanted you to know that I'm not, she searched for the word, broken by it, in case you were worried. I wasn't, I said, which was a lie, and she probably knew it. But I'm glad you told me anyway. She went back to her laptop. I sat for another few minutes, and then got up and went to the kitchen to make lunch. And the house was warm and quiet in the way that you only notice after a long time of it being neither of those things. Price was sentenced to 9 years. His attorney called it excessive. The families of 2 informants who had been compromised by Price's cooperation with Ray's network, one of whom had been relocated twice and whose children had been pulled out of school, probably felt differently about the word excessive. I visited the county jail once, not to see Price but to see Coyle. He had been moved there pending trial. I don't entirely know why I went. Closure maybe, though I've never been sure I believe in closure as a concept. He looked smaller through the visitation glass, which is something I've noticed seems to happen to men who have lived inside the certainty that power makes them permanent. The uniform was gone. Everything it stood for was gone. What was left was just a man in his 40s who had made a series of choices and was now surrounded by their consequences. He picked up the phone because he didn't have the option not to. What do you want? He said. His voice was flat. I wanted to tell you that my daughter is fine, I said. She's back in school. She's on the debate team now, which I didn't see coming. She's been talking about pre-law. Something crossed his face. Not remorse, exactly. More like the specific discomfort of realizing that the thing you tried to silence has only gotten louder. She's the reason any of this happened, I continued. Not me. A 16-year-old kid with a phone and the instinct to document something that looked wrong. You tried to take that from her and it didn't work. You got lucky, he said. Most people don't have what I have. I know. It was the same thing that had kept me up at night since the beginning. That's why the fund exists. So the next Zoe doesn't need a father with 12 years of special operations and a secure server to get justice? He didn't say anything. You're not going to be in there forever, I said. When you get out, you're going to have to live in a world where the thing you did didn't work. I hope that's instructive. I hung up the phone and stood up and walked out into the gray October morning. The air smelled like rain and exhaust, and the particular alive feeling of a city that doesn't know or care about any single story within it. I got in my car and drove home. My wife was in the kitchen when I arrived, making the kind of elaborate pasta that she only makes on weekends, the kind that takes 3 hours and smells incredible. She looked at me when I walked in and didn't ask where I'd been. Zoe called, she said. She wants to know if we can go to that Vietnamese place on Saturday. Tell her yes, I said. I sat at the kitchen table and watched my wife cook, and outside the window the leaves were turning and the neighborhood was doing what neighborhoods do in the fall, existing in the ordinary and underappreciated way that only feels precious when you spent time afraid of losing it. I thought about what Zoe had said. I'm not broken. I thought about Ray, sitting in a minimum security facility somewhere, taking stock of his choices with whatever part of him was still capable of taking stock. I thought about Price's beach house in St. Lander, Simon's Island, which had been seized as part of the federal forfeiture proceedings and was currently empty, the keys held by a government agency that would eventually auction it off to someone who would have no idea what it had cost or who had paid. I thought about Detective Ochoa's investigation into Ray's company, the one that had been killed in 6 days. I had tracked Ochoa down through my contacts. He had left the force the year after his case was closed, gone into private practice. I had sent him a copy of the full file on Price with a note that said only, "You were right. It mattered." He had written back one line, "It always does." I got up and poured myself a glass of water and stood at the window and looked at the street. 9 years ago, I left a life where I spent every day calculating threats, managing variables, moving through situations where the cost of a mistake was something that couldn't be undone. I left because I wanted to build something instead of dismantle things. I wanted quarterly earnings and school pickups and arguments about whose turn it was to deal with the HOA. I still want those things. I want them more than I did before, but I know now what I think I always knew and tried to talk myself out of. That the thing I was built to do doesn't disappear just because I stopped doing it. It waits. And sometimes, for good reasons or terrible ones, it gets called back into use. I don't think I'm a hero. I want to be clear about that. I had resources and training that most people never get. I had contacts that took a career to build. I won because of advantages that were never fair to begin with, which is exactly why the fund exists. Because the story I just told you should not require what I brought to it. Zoe shouldn't have needed a father like me. She should have just needed the law to work. And now, at least in some small and imperfect way, I am trying to make that more true than it was. That has to be enough. Most days I think it is. If you've been listening to this and you've been in a situation where the system failed you, where someone in a uniform used that uniform as a weapon, I need you to know that what happened to you was not the law. It was people hiding behind the law. And there is a difference. Document everything. Keep copies. Find your Ochoa, the person who believed you even when the institution didn't. And if you can't find one, contact us. Now, I have to ask you something, and I want your honest answer in the comments. If your own family member, someone at your holiday table, your own blood, had set something like this in motion, would you have turned them in? Or is there a version of you that would have tried to protect them? There's no right answer. I've thought about it every day since. Tell me yours. And if this story meant something to you, hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. The more people know what's possible, the harder it is for the Prices of the world to keep operating in the dark. I'll see you in the next one. There's something I keep coming back to, even now. Not the arrests. Not Price being walked out in handcuffs on a Friday morning, or Ray's voice cracking on the phone when he finally ran out of moves. What I keep coming back to is Zoe, sitting in the back seat on the drive home from the precinct at 4 a.m, saying quietly, "They took my phone. It had the video on it." She wasn't asking me to fix it. She was just stating a fact. The way kids do, when they've already processed something faster than the adults around them think they can. She was 16. She saw something that looked wrong and she documented it. That's all she did. And the system that was supposed to protect her tried to use her as a warning to the rest of us. Keep your head down. Don't look too closely. Don't point your camera at the things we'd rather you didn't see. What I've learned, not from this situation, but from the 12 years before it, from every operation I was ever part of, is that corruption doesn't survive exposure. It can only operate in the dark. The moment you shine a clear, documented, undeniable light on it, it starts dying. It may take weeks. It may take months. The paperwork is miserable and the waiting is worse. But it dies. Every time. Price wasn't powerful because he was exceptional. He was powerful because the people around him had decided it wasn't worth the trouble to look. Ray wasn't clever. He was just banking on everyone else's discomfort with conflict. Coyle wasn't dangerous because he was strong. He was dangerous because he had learned that most people, when threatened, go quiet. What they never accounted for was someone who had spent a career in environments where going quiet gets people killed. I don't tell this story to make myself sound like a hero. I'm genuinely uncomfortable with that framing. I had advantages that most people in Zoe's situation never get. I had resources. I had contacts. I had training that I paid for in years of my life and parts of my health I'll never fully get back. When I say I dismantled them, I mean I had help, and a lot of it. And the man who did it alone in a room was Aldous, not me. The point isn't what I did. The point is what Zoe did before any of it. She made a choice in a gas station parking lot at night to document something that looked wrong, even though she was just a kid with a phone and no idea what she was looking at. That instinct, that refusal to look away, is not something I taught her. It's something she had on her own. That's the thing about integrity. You can't install it in someone. You can model it. You can create conditions where it's safe to practice. But when the moment comes, it either shows up or it doesn't. In Zoe, it showed up without hesitation. And Ray, who had every advantage I had and more, family, education, opportunity, chose to spend his to buy silence and protection. He ended up with a guilty plea, a fine, and 2 years that his attorneys worked very hard to reduce. The greed ate everything he built and left him smaller than he started. I think about that contrast a lot. Same family, same dinner table, completely different understanding of what power is actually for. Power used to protect yourself at the expense of others always has a ceiling. Power used to build something that outlasts you doesn't. The Hartwell Justice Fund has taken 11 cases since I set it up. We've won 9. The other 2 are still in motion. That's what I want people to take from this. Not the revenge, not Price sentence, but the 16-year-old on the debate team who never stopped believing that what she saw mattered and turned out to be completely right.